What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video. And in this video, I'm going to be discussing the next format that I'm going to cover, or should I say format that I'm going to cover, Silly Snake. And the reason why I put that in quotation marks is because this format isn't really played anywhere. It's kind of like a hypothetical format. It's basically like, what if we had the card pool from the next format, which is Joey Pegasus, and we played with the Android format limited list. I like exploring these just to show why certain cards do pop up on the limited list, and potentially show what they can do at 3 copies each. And these generally make for some pretty fun and interesting formats to see. Probably not the healthiest formats to play long term, but if we're just dipping our toes in, they can be pretty fun. So between Android format and Joey Pegasus format, there were some new cards that got released. Notably, the Starter Deck Joey and Starter Deck Pegasus both came out, as well as some video game promos for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Worldwide Edition Stairway to the Destined Duel video game. And these all had some pretty impactful cards in them. I'm planning on going through each new, unique individual card that actually does something in my guide to Joey Pegasus format. But the big ones that you have to know about for this video is that Starter Deck Pegasus released Graceful Charity, Starter Deck Joey released Scapegoat, which I'll get into a bit later, and the video game promos released Harpy's Feather Duster and Sinister Serpent. So the overall quantity of new cards may not be that high, but the power level of these cards are insane. Graceful Charity is one of the best cards in the game, period. And it lets you just draw through your deck and see so much of it very quickly, especially when you're able to play with 3 copies. Sinister Serpent is a way to just recycle resources from your graveyard, basically. And if you're pitching these for Graceful Charity, then you're getting in basically free draws with very little downside. And Harpy Feather Duster just clears away your opponent's entire back row, so it's kind of like a one-sided heavy storm. So these cards are insanely strong and will be very important in Joey Pegasus format, and they are very important in Silly Snake format, but I'm not going to be focusing too much time on Silly Snake format. There are mainly just 2 decks that I actually want to show off, just to show off what these cards can do at 3 copies each. And they're basically the standard Good Stuff Beast Spellcaster Tomato Control list from Android format, which still does see an upgraded version of play in Joey Pegasus format because it still is like a good stuff pile, so a lot of people are playing it. And also, given the amount of draw in this format, I do want to show off Exodia because having 3 Graceful Charity can make this deck turbo out Exodia pretty quickly, potentially. And I do have some example deck lists to show. I don't want to make it just like an announcement video. I want to actually have some content in here that we can get discussing down in the comments. Before I go, though, I just want to say the limited list is still the same. So, you know, if you haven't played Android format, or you don't know the limited list, just take this in. There are a lot of powerful one-of cards here that hopefully we'll be able to turbo into off of a Graceful Charity at 3 copies here. But now that we've covered the limited list and some of the powerful new cards, let's show off some example deck lists and just see what I'm going to be testing out in the coming days. Of course, as I mentioned, Beast Spellcaster is going to still be a very good deck in Joey Pegasus format. The new power cards are kind of like consistency boosts for this deck, and it doesn't quite really change the way this deck is played too much, I don't think. It just sort of changes the consistency and power level of it. So the big changes to this deck from my build of it in Android format is that we've got 3 Graceful Charity in there. These cards are insane. Just drawing 3, discarding 2. It lets you see a lot of your decks. Set up your graveyard for things like Bazoo and also Skull Lair. So, of course, we're playing 3 copies of this. We're also playing 1 Harpy Feather Duster, and you might wonder why we're not playing more than this. But basically, this is to replace Heavy Storm here. In my build of this deck for Android format, I basically had 1 Heavy Storm, 3 MSTs. And I figure that we're basically going to keep that same ratio. 1 Harpy's Feather Duster, 3 MST. Also, like Harpy Feather Duster and Heavy Storm gotten a little bit worse with the inclusion of Scapegoat as a chainable back row that you can chain to Mass Spell and Trap Removal and still get some value off that. And I do think that Scapegoat is worth playing. This is a card that I didn't mention on the limited list screen because it doesn't actually get limited in the next format. And it's not necessarily a card that I think everyone will play. But this card is very good at putting up a defensive wall for your opponent, and it also combos very well with Cannon Soldier, which we do have 1 of in the deck, so you can potentially engineer a play where you just deal your opponent 2,500 damage in 1 turn, and that can be very powerful. We're also playing 2 Sinister Serpent. You could potentially play 3 here, but I figure, like, you don't really need to play 3, and if you play 3, it could clog up your deck a little bit. And, I mean, maybe you should just play 3, given that Kaiku and Bazoo both see a lot of heavy play, and with Bazoo, you can feel more comfortable banishing one of your Serpents if you've got another in the grave. But I figured, like, we just need the 2 for the 2 discards off of Charity. We don't necessarily need to go for 3. So that's why I kept it at 2. Deck space is also really tight here, as there's so many powerful cards now. So I don't necessarily think the 3rd is that necessary here. And speaking of deck space being tight, you know, Thunder Dragon is also a card that can pair very well with Graceful Charity. But I think since we have 2 Serpents, we don't really need the Thunder Dragons for that usage. It is a combo you can play, but again, deck space is super tight. And filling the deck with 3 cards that basically do nothing on their own, while having a benefit with Graceful Charity is not really the best. I mean, Sinister Serpent kind of does that, but Sinister Serpent can also be used to the chump blocker every turn. It does have some utility outside of just being a graceful discard. So I do like it a little bit better than the Thunder Dragons, but you can definitely disagree, and I think that there probably will be some debate about that if the format gets explored more fully. We've also got an additional Magician of Faith in the deck. I had only 1 copy of this card in my version in Android format, but here I think with the 3 Graceful in the format, it just pays to really have those 2 Magician of Faiths. We could even bump this up to 3, but again, deck space is very tight, and I think 2 should be enough in general. In order to make space for these changes, I cut down on the Kaikus, Gemini Elves, and Bazoo. I also sort of cut down on the trap removal, like Trap Hole, or I don't think I was playing Torrential Tribute in the deck, but I think cutting down on this is good too. This is because I figure that with the Graceful Charities and your increased access to draw power, you should be able to draw the outs to beaters more consistently, given that you just draw into your other beaters. So I think it's fine, like, having these in the side deck. Maybe this is a mistake, but again, deck space is really tight in this deck, and there are a bunch of different cards you could cut here to make room for the power cards. So I'm okay with this. I think that other people could definitely sort of have different opinions on this, but I think this is the build that I'm going to be testing out in this format. I'm very curious to hear all your thoughts on it down in the comments below. And as for the other list that I'm going to cover in this format, as I mentioned, I'm going to go for Exodia, because 3 Graceful Charity means that we could potentially turbo this thing out pretty quickly. Now, I made some very interesting choices in this deck, some that I'm not quite sure are correct, but I do think that, you know, you do have to make some hard choices when making a deck like this, and I think the choices that I made were pretty decent overall. So of course we're playing the 3 Graceful Charity here. We don't actually have Sinister Serpent in the main deck, and that might be the first kind of like head scratcher choice here. And the main reason that I didn't do this is because Exodia has a lot of cards that it can use as discard fodder. Thunder Dragon, I do think, is worth playing in Exodia, as it does deck thin, and that is very valuable in these Exodia decks. But also, the normal pieces of Exodia can just be used as discard fodder for backup soldier. So I feel like Sinister Serpent isn't as necessary in this deck. It is a recurable blocker, which is kind of nice, but I feel like we don't need it for its most powerful purpose in this deck. I do have it in the side deck, though, if in testing I want to try it out. We've also got a full 3 copies of Scapegoat, and this is why, you know, I said that I talk about this card a lot more in the future, because I do think that this is one of the most powerful cards in this format from a defensive perspective. It can be chained to spell and trap removal. The only thing that really stops it is like an Imperial Order. So this card is just really good. I mean, I guess Torrential also stops it, but that clears your opponent's monsters. So I'm personally fine with that. And so I do feel like this deck has a lot of defensive capabilities. It has a lot of draw power, since we've got the 3 Jars of Greed, the Upstart Goblin, the 3 Graceful Charity, and the Pot of Greed here. And we've also got 3 Magician of Faith to recur these cards back. In addition, we've got 3 Mystic Tomato, a Sangan, and a Witch to be able to access searchers for our pieces. And since we are playing the Witch in the Sangan, we've also got a Premature Burial, a Call of the Haunted, and a Monster Reborn. Now, one thing that you'll notice from this list is that we're not actually playing the sort of Cannon Soldier Last Will package here, as I do think that this deck has sort of gotten fast enough where it doesn't really need that as much. And also, again, deck space is really tight in decks like this. So I could have potentially cut down on a Faith or a Scapegoat or something to try and fit this in. But I really do think that the Faith and the Scapegoat will help out more in the long run than having the sort of Last Will Cannon Soldier package. This could definitely be a mistake. Other people could definitely play that in this deck if they want to. I just feel like this makes the deck a lot more consistent. However, it's also tough to say, not knowing exactly how the meta decks really will look in this format, given that it is a format that no one really plays. maybe decks will start maining Nobleman of Crossout more to deal with Magician of Faith getting back the Graceful Charity, because that is such a powerful combo. So maybe having 3 Magician of Faith isn't quite as good. Maybe it's better just to have the Cannon Soldier Last Will package here. But only time will tell, and I'm not sure people will actually sort of test this format to the extent that we'll actually be able to know that. But it is an interesting question to consider, and it is a way that this deck could not be an optimal build if people do make those choices. But I hope this has sort of provided a nice taste of things to come. I'm really excited to dive into this format, even though I won't be spending too much time on it. I'm just going to be spending probably 2 videos, one on Exodia, one on the just good stuff pile. And I think the games will be very explosive and very sort of fun to watch, so I hope that you enjoy them. If you want to be notified when those videos come out, definitely subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. That's the best way to know when I'm dropping videos, and it will also support the channel quite a bit. I'd really like to reach 700 subscribers by the end of this month, 750 in July. And we've had a pretty slow month in terms of subscriber growth. So if this is something that interests you, definitely subscribe and support the channel. In addition, if you want to play this format for yourself or any of the other formats that are featured on this channel for yourself, we have a Discord server, link will be in the description down below, but it's a great place to find games in these obscure and underexplored formats. And lastly, if you enjoyed the video, please do leave a like. It really helps with the channel a lot. But I hope you've enjoyed this taste of things to come. I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.